Hey guys, welcome back to a discussion with the team for the last grade first. My name is John and I'm here with Gareth and Richard. How's it going, guys?
Good, thanks, John.
Good, thanks, John. Nice to see you again.
Yeah, nice to have you guys back. Over the last week or so, we've been discussing, or a few sessions, we've been discussing Antarctica, the next expedition that you guys have been planning, equipment that's going down there with you guys, conditions you'll be facing. But something that a lot of people don't know or might not know about you is that first and foremost, before being adventurers and explorers, you are medical professionals and doctors, and you've spent the last year or almost 2 years now on the forefront of the COVID pandemic. And I think tonight we're just going to discuss what that's been like and how you experienced it and how it's affected not only your personal lives, your professional lives, but also your adventuring lives. So, yeah, handing over to you guys.
Well, the COVID pandemic has had a huge impact on us personally, professionally, and on the expedition itself. And we look at this in the context of the global impact, and that there's people so much worse off than us, and we're extremely lucky in the fact that we've had no one really close to us die during the pandemic. I mean, when the pandemic started in the UK, especially in March last year, I had just moved from Australia from Sydney to Cardiff, literally a week before the UK went into lockdown, to work for a year. And we were full steam ahead with the preparations for the expedition, and we had all our logistics set. We had our route planned, and everything was falling into place. And then we had to put everything on hold for pretty much 5 months, while Rich and I basically just had to put everything aside and give all our time and focus and energy into our families and our patients and our colleagues in the hospitals. So quite quickly in the UK, I found myself basically in emergency settings in the hospital, treating the sickest of the patients, and putting them on ventilators and taking them to intensive care and looking after them in intensive care. So I'm an anaesthetist by trade. And so, myself and my colleagues were right at the forefront of everything that was going on. And so it made a big impact on me, both professionally and personally.
And I know for us, we moved mid-pandemic, also flying across the world, having to go on a repatriation flight, masks, visors, sanitizers, quarantine, all the rest. So that obviously, on a personal level, affected everybody in different ways. But from a training perspective, because I'm assuming you didn't work a 9-to-5 shift. COVID and everything, knowing from what happened, it was almost a 24-hour day, every day type thing. The hospital staff just sleeping wherever they could, when they could, seeing the news reports. So from a training perspective, how did that affect you guys prepping for this expedition? Because you weren't at home, you weren't planning, you were in the middle of one of the worst things to happen on the planet in our lifetime.
I think the hardest thing about it was, putting the expedition in the context of what we were going through. As you say, John, the worst global crisis since the Second World War, and really just reassessing where our priorities were. And clearly our priorities were, in the hospital and with our patients. but that didn't mean that in the background we were still trying to, prepare for Antarctica. And so in our spare time, when we weren't at work, we were training. We weren't doing much in terms of planning the expedition, but we were trying to keep ourselves, physically and mentally fit and ready. And that meant after a 12-hour day wrapped in plastic PPE, we'd go for a 10K run or a long sled haul, or something like that. The other tricky thing was that for a long time, the gyms weren't open in the UK and we couldn't travel. We had to exercise from home. So what we could do in terms of our training was actually really limited. I found some old rusty barbells and was lifting them out in the back lane behind the house, and just doing whatever we could just to keep ticking over. But it was unprecedented times, and we just sort of did our best.
It's amazing, and yeah, it is just one of those things we just all had to adapt. And you're saying that you guys didn't end up doing a lot of logistics planning and stuff. But Rich, can you tell us a bit more about? Obviously, the expedition still had to keep ticking forward, still had to try and acquire equipment, and a lot of the equipment needed very specialized pieces of gear. And with factories closing all over the world and manufacturing shutting down during that time, essentially the world coming to a pause. How did that affect what you were trying to get from equipment perspective?
Yeah, you're quite right, John. Essentially what's happened sort of during the pandemic, and this is actually something that's become more and more apparent and more pronounced, probably as the time's gone on, is certainly the case at the moment, is that the global supply chain of everything is very disruptive. So is very disrupted. So as you say, a lot of our bits of equipment are very specialized. They're not made in particularly large quantities, even in normal times. And so for example, the very specialist manufacturers, those manufacturers have struggled to get raw materials required which are very reliant on international shipping, they're often getting the raw materials from other countries. And then, of course, their staff aren't necessarily in workshops because of the pandemic. They might be furloughed. They might be operating on very sort of low minimum capacities. And so that's meant it's been, not only has there been a huge sort of time dilation in how long it takes to get particular bits of equipment made, it's also how long it's taking to get things shipped to us, and also it's introduced a huge element of uncertainty, because lots of people just can't give us definitive timelines in how long it's going to take to get certain bits of equipment ready. And so what it's really done is stretch out how long we have to build in to be able to get certain key bits of equipment. So we've had to plan much further ahead than we would have done in normal times to make sure that we have these key bits of equipment in place before we're ready to go.
And I guess also it's then come down to just being able to have networks and people to contact and to know who to get a hold of for what, because emailing the general info@equipment.com email address might not have gotten any responses. So I think that in itself as well probably put a major stress on you guys from a communication perspective, just being able to get a hold of the right people to get the right pieces of equipment. Yeah,
and like one good example is the pair of skis that we want to take, and I'm sure as people can imagine, we're not the piece of the skis that we want to take are an absolutely key component of the expedition, and we'll talk about them in more detail in a later episode. But they're not made in very large numbers. They're made in one particular part of the world in one particular workshop, and they're only made in relatively small numbers anyway. So we've ended up having to find, one or two shops that still have a couple sitting on a shelf somewhere who don't necessarily post and ship these things internationally. So we're having to find friends and contacts in that country who can go and pick the skis up for us and then stick them in the post to get them to us in Australia and New Zealand. So you know, and that's just one item of equipment, and that's been duplicated several times with different items.
That's amazing. And so with the stresses of obviously the logistics behind the expedition and fine planning that, and then also looking at the pandemic that we've found ourselves in, and looking at the website, the Last Great First website, we can see that there's a major component, and something that's close to your heart is the Healthcare Workers Foundation, as well as the Antarctic Science Foundation and Scouts. But that element, I think, or I could stand to be corrected, but I think that element has come through because of what you guys faced in the last year. And it's just a way of supporting fellow doctors and fellow frontline workers. Is there anything that you guys want to say about that?
Yeah, look, I mean, it's incredibly important to us. What the incredible bravery and commitment of the people that have faced this pandemic on the front line is something that we wanted to, you know, we wanted to try and help all those people. So because, you know, we saw them getting, all the people in the hospital, you know, not just the doctors, but the nursing staff, especially in intensive care, right all the way through to the porters, the security, the people running the canteen 24 hours a day. All those people were putting themselves and their families at risk, especially in the early days of the pandemic. And they didn't ask for anything in return. They just turned up and they did their jobs. And these people need support. They need mental health counselling. They need, childcare support, because a lot of people went on to emergency 12-hour rosters and didn't have the ability to put their kids in childcare, so it caused all sorts of trouble. So the Healthcare Workers Foundation looks after all those things that make life that little bit easier for all these people that have given so much over the last year. So for us to do something, just a small thing for them, it's really important to us.
Yeah, I think that brings our discussion to a close around COVID and the effect that it's had on the expedition to date. But I'm sure it will be a continual thread of discussion throughout our talks going forward, and throughout the expedition posts that go up on the website and on the social media platforms. As you've rightfully said, it's the biggest thing that's happened since the Second World War, and it is something that has been an integral part in how it's affected the expedition going forward. So I thank you guys for your time, and look forward to chatting to you guys next time.
Yeah, thanks, John. It's good to talk to you, and for everyone watching, if you want to support our expedition, then please subscribe to our newsletters, follow us on social media. That'd be fantastic.
Thanks, folks. We'll see you in the next installment.